I appreciated the view of Main Street and the high bench seats that hid me from the townspeople. Carefully sliding into the booth, I picked up the cup and took a long sip. It wasn't that I was antisocial, but especially today, I didn't want to take a chance at being spotted and then dragged into a long conversation. My mood was quiet and thoughtful. The slight movement I'd made across the seat didn't hurt for a change. I only experienced a dull sensation across my stomach and knew I'd quickly forget about it when I became distracted. The binder helped. At first, I hated the thought of wearing it for even a short time, but when I learned it would get me back to work quicker, I changed my mind. It hadn't taken long to get used to the elastic material snugly wrapping around my torso. Dr. Prescott finally signed my release forms at Friday's appointment. Physically, she told me I was healed and could resume light activities. She tried to bring up my mental state, and I'd changed the subject. Recovering from a gunshot wound had been unpleasant, but I was lucky to be alive. Counting my blessings was the only thing that had kept me sane for the past 6 weeks. The less I thought about the gritty details of everything that had happened, the better I felt. I'd communicated with my first deputy, Buddy Gallenstein, every day while convalescing, and thankfully, things had been fairly quiet in Possum Gap during my recovery. Catching up on my reading list had been one of the perks of my incapacitation, and spending time with my 16-year-old daughter Chloe had been the other. After the initial shock of hearing her mom had been shot and a subsequent scolding from the teenager, Chloe had stepped up around the house, doing the chores and even cooking our meals that weren't hand-delivered by dear friends and acquaintances. I could have done without my ex, Ted, hovering the first few days home. Luckily, his girlfriend, Sandra, wasn't too happy about his attentiveness. When she'd laid down the law about her man spending too much time at my house in the wake of the shooting, he'd stopped coming, and I couldn't have been happier. My time in New Orleans was mostly a blur these days, something I'd rather forget about. But the 2 phone conversations I'd had with Sheriff Serenity Adams following the ordeal were proof that it was real. Not the shooting part. I didn't need anyone to corroborate that. My stomach wound was a constant reminder of that night in the trap house, a building where drug dealers could sell their products and users could get wasted without being disturbed. That's where Serenity and I finally found Albert Peachy. The poor kid had been pumped up with heroin to eliminate the fight in him, and if we hadn't shown up when we did, terrible things would have happened to him. Well, they had already happened, but at least he was alive and had the opportunity to heal from his ordeal. One that was partially his doing, but mostly his mother's fault. It was the time I spent with the Indiana sheriff searching for the boy that depressed and worried me. The investigation took us to places where voodoo witches and their magic seemed to exist. When my thoughts drifted to the lowlanders right here in my territory and their leader, Bethel Beaumont, I shook my head with a jerk and touched the window pane with my fingertips.